As the sun barely filtered through the heavy curtains of my bedroom, I replayed that moment in my head once more. Her voice, clear, confident, slightly haughty, like all the women in this house, sounded without a shadow of a doubt. "This handmade gift looks very cheap," my granddaughter said, and her words, piercing the air like a needle, carried more than a simple remark. They were a well-aimed arrow, poisoned with the venom of contempt and condescension, in which, over the years, they all, as it turned out, had developed a dangerous habit to devalue everything that did not fit into their new, carefully constructed world. Everyone laughed. There was no surprise in this, because laughter had long since become a universal means of defense and attack in our family, a signal of belonging to a circle where sympathy sounds like weakness, and memories of the past, like an anachronism. I stood there, still holding the now empty box in my hands, feeling something important, something that connected me to them, to this house, to this world, slowly, drop by drop, leaving me. The next morning I sold the beach house, where she had already sent out wedding invitations, and this decision did not come suddenly, not in the heat of the moment. No, it matured in me, as a deep resentment matures, accumulating in the layers of the soul until it reaches a critical point and turns into action, silent, decisive and irreversible. Sometimes the cruelest wounds are inflicted by those we love most, and perhaps that is precisely why they hurt so long and so quietly that you do not notice how you become not a person for them, but a background, a detail of the interior, an obligatory item in the family annals, which is convenient to mention in toasts, but inconvenient to invite to dinner. I never thought that my own family would consider me expendable, something that served its purpose, like an old tablecloth or a tarnished silver spoon that is put away in a drawer and then forgotten completely, until one fine day gratitude gave way to laughter, and I suddenly realized that I no longer fit into this world, not by age, not by views, not by lifestyle, not by values. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. My story is not only about revenge. I am not one of those who base their actions on the thirst for retribution. It is about returning what was always mine, my dignity, my right to be heard, the right to be significant, even if my significance is expressed not in zeros on a bank account, but in priceless hours spent alone over tiny details. I spent 3 weeks making these little crochet dolls, and I crocheted each one with tenderness, with love, with the hope that someone would understand how much feeling I put into these simple shapes, that someone would feel in them not only the threads and wool, but the warmth of my arthritic fingers, working for a long time, despite the pain, silently, with the patience that life taught me. Inside one of them, hidden where no casual observer would find it, I hid my grandmother's diamond, the same one that my late husband Diego hung on our 50th anniversary, when we stood on the terrace of that same beach house, watching the waves crash against the shore, and he said that our whole life was reflected in this stone, multifaceted, strong and full of light. The same diamond that Beatrice had been hinting at for months, surreptitiously, in those small phrases that seem innocent but reek of a desire to possess something that doesn't belong to her. Talk about family heirlooms, about how grandma certainly doesn't need things like that, and I understood it all then. But I kept quiet, not knowing how to say that not everything that isn't worn every day loses its value. When I arrived for my granddaughter's birthday at her townhouse in Beacon Hill, the owner didn't recognize me. The young man at the door, his hair perfectly coiffed and his eyebrows raised lazily, looked at me as if I were a stranger, and I had to show identification to enter the house I had helped finance. This should have been my first warning, but, as often happens with older women, I chose to write it off as a misunderstanding. "Grandma Eleonora has arrived," my son Mateo announced, still glued to his phone, in the same tone he used when he noted that the weather might get worse, a slight inconvenience wrapped in a duty. The room smelled of expensive perfume and pretentiousness, designer clothes, and strategic connections in champagne glasses that never emptied, and I clutched my small gift, wrapped in paper I had carefully selected from the stationery store where Beatrice had worked during college, and she had proudly shown me her employee discount, and I had been so touched that I had treasured the moment the way others treasure expensive jewelry. Gift time. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, clinked her glass. "Beatrice, darling, start small." My granddaughter's eyes were fixed on the tiny package in my hands. I stepped forward, holding out my hand with the smile I had practiced in the mirror that morning. "Happy birthday, darling." She took it in her manicured fingertips, her nose slightly wrinkled as if the smell of something sickly cheap had entered her nostrils, and at the same moment the light from her diamond tennis bracelet, obviously an expensive gift from Romeo, her fiancé, slid across her champagne glass and blinded me, as if the light itself had decided to become an accomplice to her arrogance. Romeo, standing across the room, watched with the detached interest of a man accustomed to assessing not people but opportunities, potential investments, prospects for profit, and not depth of feeling, and his expression only confirmed my suspicion of how deceptive modern politeness can be: smooth, polished, but absolutely empty inside. There was a hush in the room as she unfolded the paper, the way it does when, in a society of high expectations, someone brings something other than what was on the agenda, not a designer gift, not a piece of jewelry, not a check, but something too personal, too labor-intensive, too real to belong in this glossy space. Inside the box were two knitted figures, painstakingly crafted to resemble Beatrice and Romeo on their upcoming wedding day, and I remember measuring every inch of yarn, trying to capture the likeness, the expression, the proportions, not because I thought they would appreciate it, but because I wanted to be a part of this somehow, even if I had no role to play other than that of an observer. Beatrice held them up with two fingers, away from her cream dress, as if they might stain it, as if the simple wool texture of these tiny dolls was a threat to her perfect image. "This handmade gift looks so cheap," she said, and her voice rang out in the quiet room like a crystal ringing sound, beautiful on the outside but sharp on the inside, and for a second I felt the air stop moving. Then she laughed, that familiar ringing sound she used to make when I told her bedtime stories, but it was different now, filled not with childish delight but with adult disdain, and I heard her add, without looking at me, "Grandma, you do know we have a receptionist at Neiman Marcus, right?" Romeo chuckled, with that tone of arrogant condescension that young men often use when they want to express their silent superiority, and said under his breath, "Perfect for donations," and the room exploded with laughter that echoed along the marble walls, as if they all, even the walls, agreed with his words. Matteo barked his dry, insincere laugh loudly, Vanessa giggled with mock delight, and Romeo's friends snorted as if they were witnessing a particularly good joke. My cheeks burned as if I had been struck, and perhaps it was a blow, not physical, but no less painful in its humiliation, because it came from those I had raised, nursed, educated, to whom I had given all my best years. I felt like I wanted to tell you about the diamond hidden inside, the hours of work, its meaning, the tears I held back as I threaded the needle through the thick yarn, the memories woven into each stitch, but the words stuck in my throat like a lump, and at that moment Matteo, as if he felt the need to sum it up, put his hand on my shoulder and, with that delicacy that somehow only heightens the humiliation, said, "Mom, maybe we should talk about helping you with your finances. These little crafts show that you may have too much time on your hands." I looked around the room, looking for at least one sympathetic face, at least one look that would say, "I see you, I understand you," and at that moment my grandson Samuel, standing in the corner with a camera, met my gaze with a quiet apology, and this small kindness almost broke me, because the defense did not work against it, it went straight to the heart. I left early, and laughter came after me, light, rarefied, carefree, like the wind that no one needs to stop, and it accompanied me to the car, to the road, to the very house. At home, in the harsh blue light of my computer screen, I found an email from Beatrice with wedding contracts for me to sign and pay for, and every word of it cut like glass, especially the phrase, "We've already sent out the invitations," as if the decisions had been made without me, as if my opinion mattered, as if I was just a wallet with a password. "The decorator will start the renovation next month. Your old furniture will have to go." My hands shook as I closed the laptop. For the first time in decades, I felt something harden inside me, hardening where there had always been softness, unwavering determination where there had once been compliance. The morning after Beatrice's party, I woke up to a text from Matteo. "Mom, found a great retirement home in Brooklyn. Made an appointment for us next week just to check it out." I deleted it without replying, and as I looked out the window at the Boston skyline, the buildings glittering in the May sun, I wondered, how many decisions had been made in those towers that had changed people's lives without their consent? Was I just another elderly statistic to be managed? The keys to my beach house were on the nightstand next to my bed. I grabbed them in my purse. Suddenly, I wanted to see the property before the renovations began. The drive to Cape Cod took longer than usual, not just because of the heavy traffic but because every mile felt like an effort, as if the road itself was trying to keep me from returning to the place I'd always thought would be mine forever, but which someone had already begun to slowly, methodically, with smiles and architectural plans, tear away from me, like pages from a book you once wrote. My hands gripped the steering wheel with unnecessary force, making my arthritic joints scream in protest, but I didn't loosen my grip because I knew if I let go now I might not make it at all, and I needed to see for myself, to see if reality really was as cruel as my heart told me. When I arrived, there was a strange car in the driveway, a shiny black SUV I didn't recognize, with tinted windows and an air of confidence that made it look like it belonged here. When I opened the front door, I could hear voices from the great room, light and casual, discussing as if the house was already theirs, as if my past were just a temporary inconvenience. The wall between the kitchen and dining room could definitely come down, the woman said, with the intonation of a connoisseur who knows the value of taste rather than brick. Mrs. Thompson won't mind. She hardly ever shows up. So I walked in the door. Beatrice, Vanessa, and a stylish woman with a tablet were standing in my kitchen that once smelled of cinnamon, where I taught Beatrice how to make Diego's favorite clam chowder when she was 9 and still clung to my apron instead of my phone. Actually, I object, I said quietly. They turned around, and Vanessa was the first to recover, instantly switching to a polite, exclamation-like tone. Eleanor, what a pleasant surprise. We were just discussing some small updates for the wedding. Knocking down a load-bearing wall is hardly a small update, I said, removing my gloves and placing my purse on the counter, examining each face as if for the first time. Who approved these changes? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm despite the way my knees were shaking. Beatrice stepped forward, her voice taking on the tone one would use with children or elderly relatives, all honey and concern. Grandma, we've talked about this. Remember last Christmas you said we could use the house and make it perfect for the ceremony? I said you could use it. I never agreed to tear it down, I said clearly. It's not a tear down, it's an upgrade, the designer interjected, looking at me with professional condescension, as if I were a child incapable of grasping the most basic concepts. The bones of the house are great, but the aesthetic is a little dated, he continued, flipping through something on his tablet. I walked over to the living room window and looked out at the Atlantic Ocean, the same view Diego and I had saved for over a decade, denying ourselves so much that we could wake up to the sound of the surf. The designer followed my gaze, scrolling through the images on her tablet. We think white everywhere. Walls, cabinetry, fixtures, clean, minimal, Instagram ready. I noticed that the photo of Diego and me from our 40th anniversary was missing from the mantel, and in its place was a mood board that read, Hamptons Chic. Where's my photo? I asked. Vanessa glanced around absently. Oh, we carefully packed some personal items for safekeeping during the renovation. That night, after they left, I searched the house. In the garage, I found 3 boxes labeled Eleanor's things. Inside were a photograph, Diego's books, our anniversary album, and the little crochet dolls from Beatrice's party, all tossed in there like junk, and only I knew that one of them still had a diamond hidden inside. My phone rang. It was Mateo. Mom, about the senior citizen tour. I can't talk now, Mateo, I interrupted. It's important to start planning for your future. There's a long waiting list for the fees. Vanessa and I were thinking that since the beach house will be used mostly for family events, it might make sense to put it in a family trust, if only for tax purposes, of course. His voice was even, rehearsed. I recognized that tone from the one he used in court, when he was leading a witness to a predetermined conclusion. I have to go, I said, and hung up. After I hung up, I noticed a brochure on the kitchen table that hadn't been there that morning. A beachfront retirement community where independence meets assistance. Someone had circled the floor plan in red marker and scribbled a note in Vanessa's handwriting, perfect for Mom. I realized they were already compartmentalizing my life, and I was letting them. Your blood pressure is alarming, Eleanor, Dr. Matthews said, studying my chart through his wire-rimmed glasses. It's increased significantly since your last visit. Have you been through any unusual stressful situations lately? I almost laughed. Where should I begin? With my granddaughter publicly humiliating me and my son plotting to seize my assets? Strangers renovating my home without permission? Instead, I said it was some kind of family tension. Dr. Matthew took out his stethoscope. At your age, with your background, stress isn't just uncomfortable. It's dangerous, he said, peering at me over the top of his wire-rimmed glasses. I've seen patients your age hospitalized after family conflicts triggered heart attacks, he added, his words hanging between us in an office that smelled of sterile cleanliness and the kind of hushed concern that doctors were trained to hide behind professional reserve. I stared at him, thinking about how I'd survived Diego's death, breast cancer at 60, and a lifetime of challenges that had toughened me more than he could ever imagine. Was I going to let my own family's betrayal cause my final collapse at the end of my story? I'm adjusting my approach to certain relationships, I said carefully, choosing my words so that they wouldn't sound like hurt or anger or confusion, even though they all flowed like a dark river beneath my voice. Later that day, I met Laura, an old friend, for lunch at our favorite Back Bay Cafe, a cozy nook with cracked wood floors and the tart smell of freshly ground coffee that hadn't changed in decades. Unlike me, Laura had never remarried after losing her husband, and as she once said with characteristic wryness, men are like desserts, a nice treat, but not necessary for survival. She listened without interrupting as I recounted the events of the past month, raising an eyebrow or nodding slightly, and her fork was already halfway to her mouth when I described the incident with the crochet dolls. "And the diamond?" she asked finally, putting down her cutlery. "As far as I know, it's still inside the doll," I said. They hadn't even examined the gift closely enough to find it. Laura set out the cutlery with a silent emphasis on the finality of the conversation. "Eleanor, this isn't just disrespect. They're systematically maneuvering to control your assets," she said, looking at me intently. "Mateo mentioned the family trust." "Of course he did," I sighed. "Once your property is in the trust he's managing, you'll be getting your allowance out of your own money." She leaned forward, her hand finding mine with a flick of her fingers. "Has he asked for power of attorney yet?" she asked, and I nodded, unable to lie. "I've already put off seeing him after Christmas 3 times. "Thank God for that," I breathed. Laura's grip tightened on my hand. "Eleanor, I've seen you give everything to this family, your time, your money, your emotional energy. What exactly do you get in return?" The question hit me like a physical blow. What was I getting? Certainly not respect, not attention, not even basic gratitude. "They're my family," I tried to tell myself each week as I sent money, bought gifts, babysat. "No, they're people taking advantage of your soft side." "There is a difference," Laura said calmly, almost matter-of-factly, as if she were talking about the weather, but it was precisely her calm that made my hands tremble. On the way home, I stopped at the small local bank where Diego and I had kept a safe deposit box for decades, a small refuge from change, a point of prominence in a world that was constantly changing. Inside were birth certificates, our marriage license, and Diego's collection of rare coins, things my family didn't know about, and perhaps that's why they still mattered, still belonged to the two of us, and weren't part of someone else's calculations. That evening, my grandson Samuel called. "Grandma, are you okay? You left the party so suddenly." His concern warmed something in me that had grown cold, a part of me that still held the warmth of unconditional love. "I'm okay, honey. Just tired," I said. "I heard Dad talking about the beach house. Are they really planning a major renovation without asking you?" So Samuel noticed, I thought. In the family of borrowers, he was the only one who seemed bothered by their behavior. "It looks like they had a lot of plans they didn't consult me about," I said after a pause. He paused. "Grandma, I found something you should see." Dad left some papers in the printer at home. Financial statements. They don't look good. I tightened my grip on the phone. "What kind of statements?" "Investment losses. Second mortgage notices. I think they're counting on your assets to save them." While we were talking, I opened my online banking. There had been 3 login attempts from an unknown device in the last week. Everything fell into place. This wasn't just about the wedding venue or renovation preferences. It was about desperation and opportunism disguised as family. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Beatrice holding those crochet dolls between her fingers, her face twisted in disdain. The diamond inside could have paid for her entire wedding, if she'd bothered to look beneath the surface. Maybe it was time for me to stop looking for redeeming qualities in them, too. The next morning I called Thomas Cooper, the estate lawyer Diego had introduced me to 2 years ago, when we'd first begun seriously discussing what would happen after us, how to protect each other and everything we'd built together, from the ill-advised decisions, the pressures, the predatory intonations of those who feel entitled to dispose of someone else's labor. He agreed to meet me for coffee that afternoon, and his voice betrayed his surprise at my urgency. Our correspondence was usually infrequent and strictly businesslike, without unnecessary emotion. "Bring with you all the financial documents you can find," he said. "And, Eleanor, come alone." The cafe was quiet, tucked away in a secluded alley between two office buildings, as if tailor-made for conversations not meant for prying ears. Thomas had aged since I had last seen him. His beard was grayer, the lines around his eyes were deeper, but his handshake was firm, his gaze as direct and clear as ever. "Diego would be concerned about this," he said after I had laid out the gist of the situation, without missing a single detail. "Diego expected more from his son," I replied, looking into my coffee cup as if it reflected the man I had lived with for half a century. Thomas spread the documents Samuel had sent me the night before on the table and studied them for a long time, putting on his reading glasses and commenting only with the most restrained interjections. "These investment losses are significant, plus the second mortgage, the credit card debt. Mateo is underwater financially, and I am the life raft," I said, and the comparison suddenly seemed so accurate that for a moment I felt a physical tightening in my chest. "Exactly," Thomas nodded. "Eleanor, I've seen this scenario play out dozens of times. It rarely ends well for parents. What would you advise?" I asked, already knowing the answer but needing confirmation. "Protect yourself." "Now," he said, leaning forward. "Where are your assets currently located?" I described everything in detail: the brownstone in Boston, the beach house on Cape Cod, the investment accounts, the insurance policies. Thomas took notes, asking occasional follow-up questions, like a surgeon preparing for a complex but necessary operation. "Who has access to these accounts?" "No one but me." "Keep up the good work," he nodded. "And are both properties in your name only?" "Yes." Diego insisted on it. Thomas nodded approvingly. "Smart man. Now about the wedding." "It's to be held in September, at my beach house, without my informed consent," I continued. He leaned back, lacing his fingers over his stomach, his gaze analytical. "You have options. Legal options. For example, this is your property, Eleanor. You can cancel the wedding." I imagined the family drama, the accusations, the distant looks, the reproaches that would sound like convictions. The potential health consequences that Dr. Matthew had warned about came back to me. That would create significant conflict. "Yes," Thomas agreed. "But there are other approaches. More specific ones." That single word, specific, struck a chord with me, awakening a part of me I had long forgotten, one that acted with intent rather than simply reacting to circumstances. For months I had been on the defensive, patiently responding to maneuvers, avoiding confrontations, as if hoping that everything would work itself out. Perhaps it was time for a more assertive response. "I'm listening," I said. Later that day, I visited my bank and spoke to a manager about trying to access my account. She shook her head in dismay and recommended additional security measures, which I immediately implemented: double authentication, restricted access, notifications for every action. When I got home, I found a text from Beatrice about final approval for the wedding flowers. She'd counted on me to cover the $18,000 expense without even bothering to ask. On the table next to me was another brochure about retirement communities, this one even further from Boston, with Vanessa's neat handwriting, a more affordable option. My phone rang. It was Samuel. "Grandma, I thought you should know. Dad is having dinner with your financial advisor tomorrow. He mentioned something about consolidating Mom's investments for a bigger return." I thanked him for the information, hung up, and immediately called Thomas back. "I've made my decision," I said. "I'd like to review the final option we discussed." He paused for a moment. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure that once we start this process." I looked out the window at the Boston skyline, where the evening lights were already starting to come on like the beacons of a new phase. It's time for me to stop being a passenger in my own life. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly and uninterruptedly, without waking up with anxiety, without nightmares, without heaviness, and in my dreams there was Diego, standing on the veranda of the beach house, looking out at the ocean and nodding approvingly when I finally insisted on my way. "What exactly are you looking for?" Jennifer Maxwell asked, laying out a neat stack of documents and a clipboard with a portfolio of properties on my dining room table, her manicure impeccable, her movements precise as a surgeon preparing to operate. Her reputation as the most discreet real estate agent in Boston, which Thomas noted with respect and a slight smile, prompted me to turn to her of all people, without detours or hesitation. "A buyer who can close quickly and values privacy," I said, looking into her eyes, where understanding was hidden behind the cool businesslike manner. "For property on Cape Cod," she raised an eyebrow. "Waterfront properties in that area are usually on the market, I understand, for the usual period of time." She paused, reading my expression. "This situation is different," she added, as if listening not only to the words but to the silence between them. Jennifer studied my face, realizing that I didn't want to, or couldn't, say it directly, and she nodded gently. "I know several potential buyers who have been looking at this exact place. A private sale could speed things up considerably." "How quickly?" "With the right buyer and motivation? Perhaps 45 days. Maybe less." "Perfect," I nodded. That day, I drove to Cape Cod alone. The beach house stood as it always did, its facade of gray cedar, faded by sun and salt, its ocean-facing windows reflecting the silver of the sky as always. It had been a witness to 4 decades of family history, a silent guardian of our summer vacations, holiday dinners, quiet winter evenings, and the one time Diego had secretly prepared a candlelit picnic for me on the deck. Inside, I moved from room to room, touching objects as if saying goodbye to loved ones, mentally reviewing memories, Mateo learning to swim in the cove below, Samuel building elaborate sand castles at age 6 and defending them from the waves like an architect, the bonfire on the beach for Beatrice's 16th birthday, her laughter rolling like pebbles in the surf. In the master bedroom, I found more evidence of their plans. Fabric swatches for new curtains were hung neatly by the window, paint samples were taped to the wall in a row, as if they already owned the space. On the nightstand, instead of books, there was a stack of wedding magazines, each folded at the right page, as if they were waiting for my signature, my surrender. I sat on the porch swing Diego had once built with his own hands and watched the waves crash onto the shore, recede, and return again. This had been our sanctuary. Now a battlefield. Disputed territory. My phone vibrated. A text from Mateo. "Mom, we need to discuss important financial strategy. Dinner tomorrow. I'll bring Vanessa and our consultant." I didn't answer. Instead, I called Jennifer. "I'd like to begin listing the property immediately." 2 days later, Jennifer called with news. "I have interested parties. A well-known tech entrepreneur and his wife. They are willing to offer full asking price, with a closing date of 40 days, if we can keep the information completely confidential." "Say yes," I replied without hesitation. Jennifer hired professional photographers to capture the house in all its rustic yet sophisticated beauty, and I arrived that evening to begin packing. I spent the evening clearing out personal items that I could hardly bear to part with, old photo albums containing faded letters, Diego's collection of books, his tiny notes in the margins, underlines as if he were still conversing with the authors, and a small wooden box that held some of his ashes, which he had asked to remain there. As I was leaving, Beatrice, the wedding planner, appeared, a woman with perfectly coiffed hair, a tablet, and a surprised expression. "Mrs. Thompson, we weren't expecting you," she said, clutching her clipboard nervously. "I'm just measuring out a spot to pitch a tent." "No need," I said calmly. "There's been a change in wedding plans." "Changed?" "But Beatrice hasn't told me yet. She doesn't know that," I said, closing the door behind me. I drove home with a strange lightness in my chest. For the first time in months, I was acting on, rather than simply reacting to, the decisions others had made about my life. It felt both foreign and familiar, like I'd rediscovered a part of myself that had lain dormant. That night, over dinner with Samuel at my home in Boston, I'd shared my decision. "Are you selling the beach house?" His fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Before the wedding?" "Yes." He set his utensils down, looking at me with a seriousness rarely seen in young people. "They'll go crazy." "Probably," I agreed. "But it's my property. And I can sell it." Samuel was silent for a moment, and all I could hear was the dull ticking of the wall clock, breaking the silence of the kitchen where we had just finished a late dinner, simple to the taste, but full of some inner meanings. "You know what's strange, Grandma," he said finally, slowly, as if he himself was surprised at how he was formulating this thought. "I think I respect you more now than ever, and I've always respected you." His words brought unexpected tears to my eyes, not from pain or from affection, but from the unexpected recognition of something real, something long lost and almost forgotten. "Thank you, Samuel," I said, trying not to let my voice waver. "And what will happen next?" "They'll be angry." "Especially Dad," he said, and his voice did not sound alarmed, but fact, a sober acceptance of what was to come. I met his gaze steadily. "I'm not responsible for managing their emotions." I finally realized that. As Samuel helped me wash the dishes, he asked the question I'd been waiting for, even if I hadn't realized it. "Is it because of what Beatrice said about the gift?" I considered my answer carefully, choosing between truth and diplomacy, and chose the former, because he was the one who deserved honesty rather than concealment. "It's because this moment revealed how they saw me. What they valued. Or, rather, what they no longer valued." I rinsed the plate, watching the water spiral down the drain, and added, "Some realizations are never forgotten, Samuel. They forever change the contours of who you were and who you will no longer be." Later, alone in my office, I received an email from Jennifer formalizing the purchase offer. The closing date was set for exactly 1 week before Beatrice's wedding, and I signed the paperwork electronically, feeling the weight of decades lift off my shoulders with each click of the mouse, as if each formality, each notarized document, each scribbled signature were steps toward freedom, from guilt, from debt, from an old role I no longer had to play. Whatever storm was coming, I was ready to weather it. The first sign that my family had learned of my plans came at 11:23 p.m., when my phone exploded with notifications. 3 missed calls from Mateo, 7 text messages from Beatrice, the last one in all caps. "Please tell me this is not true." I silenced my phone and slept better than I had in months, free of guilt and panic. In the morning, Mateo showed up at my door, still in his workout clothes, his face flushed with tension and anger, as if his run hadn't helped him cope. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded as soon as I opened the door, not bothering to hide the fact that he'd entered my house with the feeling that he still had an absolute right to do so. "Good morning to you too, Mateo," I said calmly, stepping aside to let him in. "Coffee?" "I don't want coffee. I need an explanation." "Jennifer Maxwell? A private sale? What were you thinking?" I poured myself a cup, adding cream with deliberate slowness, and answered without looking up. "I thought it was time to simplify my life by selling our family beach house a few weeks before Beatrice's wedding. The wedding that's supposed to be there." "My beach house," I corrected gently. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, a nervous gesture I remembered from his teenage years, when he'd get just as angry if I disagreed with his opinion. "You can't do that. We've sent out invitations, we've put down deposits. The venue can't be changed now." "Then I suggest you start looking for alternatives," I said, without harshness, but with an unwavering confidence I felt like I hadn't had in a long time. His face darkened. "This is a birthday party, isn't it?" Beatrice's comment. "She was just kidding." "You're overreacting, Mom." I sipped my coffee, eyeing my son over the rim of my cup, and in that moment I saw how his resemblance to Diego barely covered up his lack of integrity. "This isn't just a comment, Mateo. It's about a pattern of behavior. Including yours." "What are you talking about?" "The retirement community brochures. The financial strategy meetings you organized without me. The unauthorized attempts to access my accounts. His expression faltered. It was for your own good. You're getting older. I'm old, but not incapacitated. I set my cup down on the saucer with a short sound that sounded like a period. And I'm certainly not a skeptic, although I suppose such a plot could serve your purposes. Mateo's facade cracked. His lips twitched, his eyes averted. Mom, please. I'm in trouble. The Westridge development project has fallen through. The investors are threatening to sue unless I find capital. So it's about money, I said, and I felt strangely calm, as if the debt I had once committed myself to repay had ceased to exist. Both, he insisted, but his eyes still avoided mine. How much do you need? I asked, without looking up, and when he named a figure whose number of zeros seemed absurd even to me, a woman who had seen plenty of ambition, his answer confirmed everything I already knew, everything I had suspected, everything I had tried to brush aside for so long, hoping for the best. It wasn't about helping me, it was about saving himself, panic carefully veiled in hypocrisy. I told him the deal would close in 5 weeks, and the proceeds would go into accounts he wouldn't have access to. You're doing this to your family, to Beatrice, to me, he said accusingly, as if I were breaking an unwritten law he'd been following for years. I went to the window and looked out at the city I'd called home for almost 8 decades, the bricks, the bridges, the signs that had known me in my youth, seen me in sorrow and in happiness, but had never asked me to betray myself. You left me no choice, Mateo, I said. You showed me how much you respect my independence, my desires, my place in this family. It's not fair, he breathed. I turned to face him. Isn't it? When was the last time any of you asked me what I wanted, instead of telling me what I needed? His silence was answer enough. That same day Beatrice came, red-eyed, still in yesterday's clothes, exhausted perhaps from a sleepless night, but still glowing with that innate confidence that her wishes would be heard simply because they were hers. Romeo is going mad, she said without preamble. His parents are horrified. Do you have any idea what that would make us look like? The old Eleanor, the one who existed in comfort and concession, would have consoled her, apologized, found a way to smooth things over. But that woman was gone, and in her place was one who had finally realized her own worth and stopped giving in to a world in which her own feelings were last on the list. That's about as bad as I looked when you mocked my gift in front of everyone, I answered calmly. Beatrice flinched as if I had struck her. That was different. I was just being honest. Me too, I said. The house is for sale. We need a new place for the wedding. But why? Why are you doing this to me? She asked, with a note of incomprehension that in another situation might have been pitiful. I studied my granddaughter, beautiful, privileged, with unwrinkled skin and nails shining with care, but completely blind to a reality other than her own. I'm not doing anything to you, Beatrice. I'm doing something for myself. When she left, theatrically indignant, her shoulders shaking, I felt no satisfaction, only a quiet certainty that I was finally standing on my own truth, after decades of adjusting, smoothing corners, and endless compromises. That evening, an unexpected guest came to see me, Romeo, Beatrice's fiancé. Mrs. Thompson, he began awkwardly, shifting from foot to foot. I wanted to talk to you directly. Without interruption. I invited him inside, not out of politeness but out of curiosity, to understand what could motivate a young man accustomed to dismissive politeness to do such a thing. I came to apologize, he said, looking down. For laughing at your gift. It was disrespectful. I studied him, his eyes, his hands, his posture, looking for the manipulation hidden behind the politeness. Why now? I asked. He looked down at his expensive shoes and inhaled. Because I'm beginning to see things differently. The way everyone reacted to your decision has shown me a side of this family I've never seen before. For the first time, I saw something genuine in him, maybe even an acknowledgement of the complexity of the world he was about to enter, and an understanding of the price women pay to be heard. Close observation is an underrated skill, I said. He nodded and stood to leave. If it makes any difference, Mrs. Thompson. I think I understand why you're doing this. After he left, I called Thomas to make sure the sale was on track. Whatever emotional turmoil was raging in my family, my course was set. 3 weeks before the scheduled closing date, Jennifer Maxwell called with unexpected news. The buyers want to move up the clock. They're offering an extra 50 grand if we can close in 10 days. I hesitated for only a moment. Say yes, I replied. That would force the deal to close 3 weeks before Beatrice's wedding date, which would undoubtedly exacerbate the crisis. I knew the consequences, the hysteria, the manipulation, the blame, but I went ahead anyway. Because I was no longer living for someone else's peace of mind. That night, I invited Samuel to dinner at my home in Boston, knowing I needed an ally in the marital chaos that would inevitably follow my actions, especially now that dates had been moved, contracts had been signed, and there was no turning back, not even in theory. The sale is early, I told him over fried chicken, his favorite childhood dish, which he still ate with the same concentrated pleasure, as if time had no power over taste and memory. He put down his fork, looked up. This is crucial. It feels right, he said, and I studied my grandson's face, grown up, intelligent, but still surprisingly pure in his intentions. You're the only one I've told, I confessed. Why me? Because you're the only one who sees me as a person and not a resource, I replied, and at that moment he pushed his glasses up his nose, a gesture so reminiscent of Diego that my heart sank for a moment with that pain that comes when the past suddenly intrudes into the present in the most mundane but most poignant way. They're planning an intervention, you know, he said after a pause. Papa, Mama, Beatrice, they think you're having some kind of breakdown. I almost laughed, bitterly, almost with relief. Of course. It's easier to believe that I have mental problems than to admit that I'm making a conscious choice that they don't like. What will you do? I'm standing my ground, I said without hesitation. Later that evening, after Samuel had left, I received a text from Mateo, family dinner tomorrow at 7 p.m. My home. Important matters to discuss. The trap was set, and I answered simply, I'll be there. Then I called Thomas. They're planning an intervention. Probably to create the impression that I'm incompetent in managing my own affairs. Are you sure you want to attend? His concern was palpable, even through the phone. Absolutely. Running away would only strengthen their position. The next evening I dressed with particular care. I wore a dark blue tailored suit, the one Diego had always liked, pearl earrings, light makeup, and the woman in the mirror looked determined, collected, with clear eyes and a straight posture, not at all like the helpless widow or lost old woman whose image they obviously carefully painted. When I arrived, Mateo's house in Wellesley was lit as if a party for 100 guests was being prepared, and through the window I could see them getting ready. Mateo pacing nervously around the room, Vanessa laying out food that I knew no one would eat, Beatrice dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief with theatrical precision, playing the wounded victim, and only Samuel, standing a little to the side, seemed uncomfortable, as if he had involuntarily become part of a performance whose script was alien to him. I rang the doorbell. Mateo answered, his welcoming smile not reaching his eyes. Mama, thank you for coming. We were so worried. The living room was silent when I entered. On the coffee table lay printouts from nursing homes, business cards from guardianship lawyers, and, most tellingly, blank power of attorney forms, as if someone had already put together a package of documents in case of an unexpected government takeover. Eleanor, Vanessa stepped forward, her voice full of feigned concern, like an actress playing the role of a doting wife. We're here because we love you. You? I calmly put my purse on the floor, keeping my voice level. How interesting. Mateo cleared his throat. Mama, we're concerned about your recent decisions. They seem impulsive and potentially self-destructive. You mean selling my own property? I asked, looking at him. Exactly, Beatrice interjected, her voice shaking, but not from pain. 3 weeks before my wedding. It's cruel and pointless. I looked around the room, these people who claimed to love me, but who systematically ignored my agency, my right to be not only a grandmother and a mother, but a woman with a will, with a memory, with fatigue. I disagree. It makes sense to avoid situations where I'm not respected. Mateo exchanged a glance with Vanessa. Mom, stress and age can cloud your judgment. We're simply offering some protections. For whom, Mateo? For me? Or for your financial interests? The room fell silent, drawn out and tense. Samuel, in the corner, couldn't help but smile. I know about the failed project, I continued. The second mortgage, the credit card debt. I know you're trying to access my accounts. Mateo's face went pale. Who told you? Does it matter? What matters is that you thought you could manipulate me instead of simply asking for help. Vanessa stepped forward. Eleanor, you're clearly confused. I've never made myself clearer, I interrupted, with the calm that usually frightens more than shouting. The house will sell next week. The proceeds will remain under my control, and this performance you have put on only confirms that I have made the right decision. I stood and packed my bag, feeling how every zipper, every clasp, every fold of the leather surface sounded like an assertion of independence. Tomorrow I have appointments with a doctor and a lawyer. Both documents will confirm my competence, in case any of you want to file a lawsuit. As I walked towards the door, without quickening my pace, Beatrice called out to me in a trembling voice, in which for the first time in all this time there was not offense or reproach, but perhaps something resembling confusion. What about my wedding? She asked. I turned around one last time, and looking her straight in the eye, calmly said, What about my dignity? The silence that followed was more pleasant than any further argument, and in that silence, as in a mirror, everything that had remained unsaid for so long was reflected. Closing day arrived in perfect late summer weather, clear skies, a gentle breeze, sunlight filtering through the leaves with rare kindness, and on such a day the beach house always seemed like heaven on earth, a place where the past met the present without reproach. I signed the final documents in Thomas's office, and his presence, discreet as always, provided not only legal protection but a form of moral support that could hardly be overstated. Congratulations, he said as I signed the final document. The bank transfer will be completed by the end of the day. I didn't feel triumphant, just a strange mix of sadness and release. 40 years of memories were now someone else's, but the future was mine, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like a blessing rather than a loss. As we left his office, Thomas hesitated. Eleanor, have you thought about where you'll live long-term? He asked, with the caution that suggests genuine interest. Actually, yes, I said, smiling at his mild surprise. I have plans, Thomas. That night, Samuel came to dinner at my house in Boston. I made pasta with sun-dried tomato and basil sauce, one of those recipes Diego considered the closest thing to Italy without a visa. After dessert, I handed Samuel the envelope. What is this? He asked, opening it to reveal a check with his name on it. His eyes widened at the amount. A gift for your photography business, I said. Grandma, this is too much. I can't, you can. And you will, I said, reaching for his hand, looking him in the eye. Diego always said you had an artist's eye. He would have wanted to support your passion. I'm just finishing what he started. Samuel blinked rapidly, as if fighting an emotion he didn't want to show. Does Dad know about this? No. And it's none of his business. I sipped my tea. You're the only one who's seen me. Who's bothered to look beneath the surface when everyone else has looked past it? Later that evening, as expected, my phone exploded with notifications, family gossip, like a runaway boat, quickly spreading the news of the sale. The voicemail from Mateo was coolly professional, as if he were speaking not to his mother but to a room of shareholders. Mom, I'm disappointed you did this recklessly. We need to discuss damage control immediately. Vanessa's message was laced with martyrdom. Eleanor, I hope you realize what you've done to this family. Beatrice is devastated. Beatrice herself sent 16 hysterical text messages, culminating in, My life is ruined and it's your fault. I turned off my phone and slept soundly, not because I was indifferent, but because for the first time in a long time I knew I had made a decision that was mine alone. The next morning, I met with a real estate agent, not Jennifer this time but a woman named Marianne, who specializes in properties for active seniors. We toured 3 condos and luxury buildings, all with 24-hour security, gated entry, amenities, and proximity to cultural attractions I had, I confess, ignored for far too long. "These have the best views," she said as we stood in a corner unit on the 15th floor of a Cambridge building, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charles River sparkling in the morning sun. "Security is top-notch, accessed only by private elevator." I surveyed the space, open and light-filled, with high ceilings, minimalist finishes, and a quiet that could be called genteel. It was so different from my current home, with its dark wood, carpets, and historic restrictions. It was as if I had stepped from a shadowy vintage photograph into a living canvas. "It's perfect," I said. By midday, I had made a formal offer. By evening, the offer had been accepted. Matteo showed up at my door unannounced just after 8, and from the look on his face, menacing, tense, a mixture of anger, hurt, and a poorly concealed sense of defeat, I knew he'd heard the news of my decision and had come not for a dialogue but for a last-ditch effort to regain control. "You're buying a property without consulting me, after everything that's happened," he began at the door, as if he were trying to accuse me of ingratitude. I let him in, maintaining a calm I didn't really feel. "I didn't know I needed your advice on choosing my own place," I said evenly, without harshness, and I could tell by the way his shoulders slumped that he hadn't expected that answer. "That's not it," he said, but the words had clearly stopped coming. "Mama, I'm trying to help you." "No, Matteo, you're trying to control me." "There is a difference." He paced my living room, tall, with arched windows and shelves filled with books he'd never read but had once helped dust. His anxiety was evident in every movement, as if he were fighting not with me but with inevitability. "The family is in crisis. Beatrice's wedding has fallen through. Romeo's parents are threatening to stop supporting us completely." "It sounds like these are problems that Beatrice and Romeo will have to solve," I answered, not cruelly, but with that cold awareness of limits that comes when love is no longer blind. "How can you be so cold?" "This is your granddaughter's future," he said, his voice shaking with tension. I studied him, my son, the one I'd raised to believe that kindness was the most important quality in a person, and watched as his once reliable moral compass turned away from true north. "Matteo, when exactly did my existence become about supporting other people's dreams without caring for my own? It's unfair, isn't it? You planned to move me into a nursing home without my consent. You tried to access my accounts without my permission. You staged an intervention based on trumped-up concerns about my mental capacity. All because I made decisions you didn't like." He didn't have an answer for that. I told him the new property was closing in 3 weeks and that I would be downsizing significantly. "You and Vanessa need to come over and pick out the furniture and pieces you like before I arrange to sell the rest." He looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. "You're really going through this?" It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes, Matteo. You really are." After he left, I stood by the window, looking out at the lights of the city, feeling a strange mix of grief and determination. I was losing my family, or, more accurately, discovering that they had never really belonged to me. A text from Samuel came through on my phone. "Just heard about Cambridge. Proud of you, Grandma. Need some help packing?" At least one bridge remained intact in the burning ruins of my family relationships. That should have been enough. Romeo's called off the engagement, Samuel told me over coffee in a small cafe near Boston Common. It was September, unusually warm, and the park around us was still green and vibrant, as if nature refused to obey the calendar. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. No matter what, I didn't want Beatrice's heart to be broken. His parents were scared, by family instability. That's what they called it. Samuel stirred his coffee absently. "Beatrice is devastated. She hasn't left the apartment in 3 days." I felt a pang of guilt, brief but sharp. It quickly gave way to determination. "It's unfortunate, but not entirely unpredictable," I said. "Daddy blames you for everything." "Of course," I sighed, watching the young couple push the stroller down the path outside. "It's easier than examining my own role in all this." Samuel hesitated. "Would you like to talk to Beatrice?" "Not to apologize, but but I think she's really having a hard time." I considered his request. "I'll think about it." Later that day, I received an unexpected call from Laura. I ran into Beatrice at Bloomingdale's, she said without preamble. She was returning wedding presents. "Eleanor, she looks terrible." Samuel mentioned that she was having a hard time dealing with the breakup. "It was more than that," Laura interrupted. "She looked broken. Not just sad. The moment she saw me, she burst into tears, right there among the dishes. That image, your granddaughter crying among expensive dinnerware she'd never need again, awakened something in me that I thought would harden me forever." After the conversation, I sat in my office for a long time, looking at old photographs that had been stored in a box labeled "Summer Memories," worn and almost illegible by time. Little Beatrice holding my hand on the beach, her hair tangled by the wind, her eyes reflecting the unconditional trust that only children can give without reservation. Beatrice at 10, proudly showing me her science fair ribbon. I remember how we glued together her project about the phases of the moon. Beatrice at 16, rolling her eyes when I tried to give her a birthday toast, but still smiling involuntarily when I mentioned her awkward dancing as a child. When did it all change? When did the affectionate child who sincerely pressed himself against my shoulder turn into an adult who felt it was okay to publicly humiliate his grandmother without thinking about the pain it caused? And was I a better person when I had power, financial, moral, emotional, and used it to strike back, as publicly and irrevocably as possible? These questions haunted me as I packed my books into boxes, sorting through them one by one, deciding what would go with me to Cambridge and what would remain, like a severed part of the past that I did not want to get rid of, but had to. My phone rang. It was Matteo. He sounded tired, depressed. "Mom, I know it has been difficult, but I am asking you, for professional and personal reasons, to call Beatrice. She is in a dangerous emotional state." "Is she getting help?" I asked, and his hesitation spoke for itself. "She does not want to see a therapist. She says it would mean admitting defeat. So it's always been like in our family, looks are more important than actual healing," I said, and promised to get in touch. That evening I texted Beatrice, "Would you like to meet for coffee tomorrow?" The answer came instantly, "Why?" "So you can gloat." "No. So I can listen." After a long pause, "Okay. Café Nero, Newbury, 2 p.m. I arrived early, choosing a corner table, away from the noisy groups. Beatrice appeared promptly at 2, wearing dark sunglasses that hid half her face despite the overcast weather. When she took them off, her reddened eyes, puffy eyelids, and pale complexion confirmed what Laura had described with discreet alarm. "You look terrible," I blurted out before I could find a softer word. Beatrice laughed, a sharp, broken laugh. "Thank you, Grandma. You always speak plainly." "Sorry. That was harsh, but fair." She stirred her untouched coffee, looking around the room. "Romeo is already dating someone else. Instagram official, yesterday. 3 weeks after the wedding was called off." I winced. "I'm really sorry." "You are?" Her eyes, still brimming with tears, met mine. "You sold the house where we were supposed to get married. You knew this would happen." "I knew there would be consequences," I admitted. "I didn't predict this specifically." "Why did you do that?" she asked, her voice shaking, but there was no longer anger in it, only exhaustion and confusion. Was it really worth it to humiliate me, to ruin my relationship with my entire family? The question hung between us like a caught breath, demanding not justification but honesty. I looked out the window, where people hurried along the wet sidewalk, unaware of the internal earthquake that was happening outside the glass. "How did you feel when you opened my gift at your party?" I asked instead. She turned away. "I don't know what that has to do with it." "Please answer the question, Beatrice." She sighed. "Great. I thought it seemed kind of homemade and cheap. I was embarrassed because everyone else was giving me expensive things. Have you thought about how I might have felt when you said that in public?" A flush appeared on her pale cheeks. "Not quite. Not sooner rather than later," That's my answer, I said quietly. I'm tired of being disregarded. Of my feelings, my preferences, my very independence being considered irrelevant to everyone else's plans. Her eyes filled with tears. So you deliberately ruined my wedding to teach me a lesson? No. I sold my property because I finally realized that it had become more important to all of you than I was. I reached across the table, not touching her hand but leaning closer. The house was a symbol, Beatrice. The real problem was that none of you saw me as a person anymore. Just an asset to be managed. An obstacle to be overcome. Or a resource to be used. She didn't answer, but for the first time I felt like she was really listening, not formally, not through the prism of preconceived grievances, but truly, with an attention that begets understanding, slowly, almost imperceptibly, working its way through layers of disappointment and guilt. Did you know there's a diamond inside one of those knitted dolls? I asked quietly, and even my own voice sounded unexpected to me, not condemning, not reproachful, but with a sadness woven into memory like silk thread into wool. The diamond is from my grandmother's wedding ring. I'd make it for you. Her head jerked up, her expression instantly white, frozen between disbelief and sudden, acute understanding. What? She whispered. If you looked deeper, deeper than what you immediately dismissed as cheap, you would find something truly valuable. The tears she had been holding back came pouring out like water from a cracked cup. I threw them away, she said in a choked voice. The dolls. I threw them in the trash that night. The finality of it all, the loss of not just the diamond but the trust, the warmth, the relationship that had once seemed unshakable, swallowed us both like a deep funnel from which we could no longer emerge the same. I think we all throw away things that were more valuable than we thought, I finally said, not blaming, not condemning, simply stating the truth that my new loneliness had brought me. We had parted without coming to an agreement, but the air between us was no longer as viscous and heavy with pain and mutual misunderstanding as before. Something had changed. A crack in the wall of resentment, perhaps too small to be called forgiveness, but enough to allow light to creep in someday. My new condo in Cambridge felt like a beginning, a real one, if a lonely one. Floor-to-ceiling windows filled the rooms with a light that my old brownstone always lacked, even on the sunniest days. Modern conveniences replaced the creaking staircases and the finicky plumbing that Diego loved to fix himself, grumbling but with a twinkle in his eye. The building security, which I had previously given little importance to, provided a peace of mind I hadn't even realized I was missing until it was there. 2 weeks after moving in, I invited Samuel to dinner. He arrived with a bottle of light white wine and a neatly wrapped package. A housewarming present, he explained, smiling. Nothing fancy or expensive, just something I thought you'd appreciate. Inside the package was a framed photograph, a black and white image of a beach house at sunset, the sun just touching the horizon and the waves crashing against the rocks with that lulling insistence that makes the ocean seem eternal. Warm lights glowed in the windows, as if someone were still making tea inside. It's beautiful, I whispered, genuinely touched. When did you take this? Last summer. I always thought it reflected something important about this place. He looked around my new house, ran his hand along the smooth windowsill. You feel lighter here, Grandma. Less burdened. I feel lighter, I said, and that was the simple truth. I hung the photograph on the wall, where the morning light played on the glass. Strangely, giving up my possessions felt less like a loss than a gain, space, clarity, and finally myself. At dinner, Samuel shared the news. His photography business was gaining momentum, with 2 gallery shows planned for the winter, and the investments I'd made were already bearing fruit. Daddy doesn't know yet, he admitted, about the money and the career change. I'm waiting for the right moment. Sometimes the right moment never comes, Samuel. Sometimes you have to create it, I said, and he nodded without arguing. After he left, I was alone in my new living room, watching the lights of the city reflect off the Charles, and for the first time in a long time, in that silence, without the frantic texts from Beatrice, the manipulative calls from Mateo, the accusatory letters from Vanessa, I felt not alone but free. The next morning, I had my routine checkup with Dr. Matthew. Your numbers have improved significantly, he noted as he reviewed my chart. Your blood pressure is down, your stress levels are stable. Whatever changes you've made are working. I've simplified my life significantly, I said. Sometimes that's the best medicine. He closed my file and asked, "How is your family?" "Complicated. Remote. But true," I said, and he nodded knowingly. "And what's that like?" I paused, then answered, like someone extracting a splinter that has festered for years. Painful. But necessary for healing. Later that week, I had an unexpected visitor, Vanessa. Unannounced, as was their custom. She was dressed immaculately as always, her coat pressed, her hair immaculately done, but there was something new, subtle, in her eyes, less confidence, more vulnerability. "You've got a lovely new place," she said after an awkward greeting, looking around the place. "Very much your style." "Thank you. Would you like some tea?" We sat in an awkward silence that seemed to grow in the shadows between us, filling the room, until Vanessa finally spoke again, her voice quieter than I was used to, almost brittle, like fragile porcelain with a crack in it. "Eleanor, I owe you an apology." Of all the revelations I could make, this was the one I was least prepared for, and so it cut deeper than any of her accusations or defenses would have. "Mateo and I are breaking up," she continued, before I could even respond with anything encouraging or cautious. "The financial problems, the stress of it all, it's all been building for years. The beach house was the trigger, not the cause." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. "You?" Her smile was sad but understanding, with a hint of surprise, as if she hadn't expected my sympathy. "We haven't been entirely kind to you." "Family relationships are complicated," I offered neutrally, not to avoid the discussion but to open a space where she could continue or retreat at her own discretion. Vanessa glanced at her perfectly manicured hands, as if they might tell her what to say next. "When you sold the beach house, a lot came to light. Mateo's financial problems, our marital conflicts, Beatrice's relationship with Romeo, which was apparently more fragile than either of us could have imagined. Sometimes a single action can illuminate a truth hidden beneath layers of self-deception." "Yes," I agreed quietly, and for the first time in a long time she looked me straight in the eye. "I want you to know that the pensioner brochures, the power of attorney proposals, all of that was my initiative in the first place." Mateo agreed, but I was the one who insisted. "It was me." The admission hit me like a sudden gust of wind on a quiet morning, but I kept my emotions in check. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I've been thinking a lot about the future. About growing old. About my mother, whom I feel the same way about you. And that's not a very flattering realization." She blinked rapidly, and there was so much face-saving in the movement that I suddenly wanted to hug her, but I didn't. We both knew too well the price of hasty intimacy. Vanessa paused at the door as she left. "Anyway, Eleanor, I think you did the right thing. It just took me a while to see it." When the door closed behind her, I stood still for a moment, listening to the silence, to the rustle of my own thoughts, which still didn't fit into the usual pattern. Too much was new, too unexpected. That evening I called Laura and told her about the unexpected visit. "People have a way of surprising you," she said. "Sometimes it's even nice. It feels more like the beginning of something than the end." "Perhaps that's it," Laura suggested. "Not a restoration of what was and what is gone forever, but perhaps the laying of the foundation for something new, something more honest." Later, alone with my thoughts, I thought about the knitted dolls and the diamond lost with them. Perhaps the same can be said about family relationships. Sometimes what seemed broken beyond repair can be rebuilt in a different form, different from before, but perhaps even stronger because it had already been broken and fixed. The diamond was gone. The beach house belonged to others now. The family I once knew was irretrievably broken, but in its place something else had arisen, not perfect, not simple, but based on truth rather than polite pretense, on respect rather than manipulation, on authenticity rather than empty pretense of caring. It was not what I expected, but perhaps the most meaningful transformations rarely follow predictable paths. On a crisp October morning, I received an email from Mateo, the first direct communication since our confrontation a few weeks earlier. The subject line was simple: coffee. We met on neutral ground, a small cafe equidistant between our homes. Mateo arrived on time, dressed more casually than I was used to seeing him in, jeans and a sweater instead of his usual impeccable suit. "You look well, Mom," he said, ordering for us both, like the old days when he'd order me tea with honey because he thought he knew what I wanted. "The new place should suit you." "It does." I studied my son's face, noticing the new lines around his eyes, where for the first time I thought something resembling resignation had appeared. "Vanessa said you were breaking up." He nodded. "It's been a long time coming. Financial troubles just hastened the inevitable." "I'm sorry." "You for your pain?" "Yes." "The end of a relationship that didn't work out?" "No," Mateo smiled faintly. "Always the straightforward one. Daddy would be proud of the way you handled all this." The mention of Diego caught me off guard, like a breath of the past brushing my cheek. "I'd like to think so." The coffee arrived, and there was a natural pause in the conversation, without tension, just that rare silence in which each of us was allowed to think, without rushing to defend ourselves or search for the right words. Mateo methodically poured cream into his cup, as if he hoped that this activity would give him a reprieve before confessing. "I had to declare bankruptcy," he finally said, without looking up. "The West Ridge project failure was worse than I had originally expected. More investors, more losses." I nodded, unsurprised. "I suspected as much." "Yes, you've always been observant." For the first time that we'd met, he looked at me directly, and there was no guilt in that look, only weariness and a bit of relief. "I just needed to ask for help, instead of doing all this behind your back." "Yes, it was meant to be." "Would you have helped me if I had been honest from the start?" he asked, and the question hung between us like a torn letter that couldn't be glued back together. I thought for a long time. I would have listened. Maybe I would have helped, with conditions. But we'll never know, will we? We both knew that real answers come from choices, not hypotheticals. Mateo was the first to break the silence. "I took a job at a small non-profit law firm. It's a fraction of what I was making, but to my surprise, it's really fulfilling. It's a big change, a necessary change." He took a sip of coffee. "I'm staying with Samuel for now. He's been a real support. He's a good man, better than any of us deserve." "He is," I agreed, and kept quiet about my financial support of his photography business, deciding that this story belonged to Samuel, not me. "Look, Mom," Mateo put his cup down. "I'm not really here to ask for money or forgiveness or anything. I just wanted to admit that I handled this whole thing badly. Catastrophically badly." I nodded silently. "Thank you for saying that. I don't expect things to go back to the way they were. Too much has happened. But I'd like to start something new. If that's okay with you." I studied his face for a long time. This imperfect, struggling man who had caused me so much pain, but who, despite everything, was still my son. "I'm willing to try," I said finally. "With limits, of course." "That's more than fair," he replied, and relief, barely perceptible, lit up his features. As we were about to leave, he asked, "Have you spoken to Beatrice lately?" "Not since we met for coffee last month." He nodded. "She's been through a lot. The cancelled wedding, Romeo's new public relationship, the loss of her job. It was the perfect storm." "Is she getting help?" "Finally, yes. Samuel convinced her to talk to someone. It seems to be helping." Outside, the wind played with the fallen leaves, swirling them over the asphalt in a light, almost musical whirlwind. As we said goodbye, Mateo awkwardly reached out to me in a gesture that had been all but forgotten. He hadn't hugged me in years, perhaps not since Beatrice was born. I let him, feeling old barriers receding, making room for something new, unknown, but perhaps more genuine. "I miss the beach house," he said, almost in a whisper. "Not for the property value. Not as a wedding venue. Just the memories." "Me too," I replied. "But you don't have to own a place to make memories. They live inside you." Back home, I pulled out old photo albums, their pages filled with decades spent at the beach house, birthdays, Thanksgivings, simple weekends made extraordinary by the simple act of talking and sharing. I picked out a few photos from Mateo's childhood, building sandcastles, learning to swim, flying kites. I had them professionally framed and sent to the address he had left in his letter, to his temporary home at Samuel's, with a simple note: "Our most valuable assets cannot be sold or given away. They live within us." That evening, I received a message from Beatrice. "I found something that I think belongs to you. Can I bring it to you tomorrow?" The question was as unexpected as it was encouraging, not because I was hoping for any particular outcome, but because it was driven by a desire to restore, if not a lost intimacy, then at least a bridge between shores that had once diverged too far. She arrived the next day, carrying a small paper bag, and despite the slight hesitation in her movements, it was clear that she had changed in appearance. A lively flush had appeared on her cheeks, her gait had become more confident, and in her voice there was that reserved but genuine inner stability that cannot be faked. "This is a nice place," she remarked, looking around. "It suits you." "Thank you. Would you like a tour?" We walked slowly through the rooms, and when we returned to the living room, where the soft autumn light streamed through the high windows, as if inviting frankness, she sat down on the sofa and took out of her bag a familiar box. "I found this among the things I put aside so as not to look at," she said, taking out the knitted dolls, the very ones that I had created with my own hands, stitch by stitch, on evenings when the pain in my joints was conquered only by stubborn love. I took them carefully, and to my surprise, I felt a wave of memories rise in my chest, not of hurt, but of kind images, connected with every twist of the yarn, with every pattern put into the fabric not only by hands but also by the heart. "I thought they were gone," I confessed. "I almost threw them away that night," Beatrice whispered. But something stopped me. She paused, as if gathering her courage. "You said there was a diamond in there?" "Yes. Inside the woman's doll. In the area of the heart." As if performing a sacred ritual, she carefully felt the figurine until she found the small, almost imperceptible hole I had once hidden beneath a layer of silk ribbon. She gasped, pulling out a tiny velvet pouch and unfolding it. In her palm was a 1-carat diamond, the same one my grandmother had worn, and then I had worn, and the one I had wanted to give to her. "How beautiful," she whispered. "All this time, sometimes value isn't immediately obvious," I said softly. "Sometimes you have to look deeper." She squeezed the stone in her hand, tears glistening in her eyes. "I don't deserve it. It was a gift. Gifts have no bearing on merit." She set the diamond and the dolls on the coffee table. "I can't take it. Not after everything. But I needed you to know I found it. I understood what you were trying to give me." She hesitated at the door as she was about to leave. "I'm in therapy now. It helps me see myself, you, everything differently. I'm glad. I'm not ready to talk about everything yet. But maybe one day. I will. I promise." When she left, I picked up the dolls again. They were faded, slightly dented, but whole. And next to them lay the diamond, sparkling even in the dim light. Some gifts, once rejected, can never be offered in the same way. But perhaps others can take their place, gifts of patience, gifts of new love, gifts of understanding. I carefully returned the diamond to its original place, not as a symbol of disappointment, but as a reminder that treasures must be guarded until someone comes along who is ready to receive them. Exactly 1 year after that very party, I hosted a small gathering at my place. The occasion was not only a housewarming, but rather a desire to gather those who were still close by, who had walked the path of change with me. The invitations were sent selectively: Samuel and his new partner Emily, Mateo, now single but calm, Laura, unchanged and stable, Thomas, without whom much would not have happened, and, to my own surprise, Beatrice, who arrived last, carrying a bouquet of autumn flowers. "Happy housewarming," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "I know," belatedly. My house, now fully furnished, was a reflection not only of new tastes but also of new priorities. Instead of heavy antique furniture, light modern. Instead of gloomy paintings, photographs of Samuel reflecting light and air. instead of curtains, opened windows that let in not only light but also the opportunity to see the world as it is. Over dinner, the conversation flowed easily, with an unexpected warmth. Matteo talked about his work at the Law Center with a genuine passion that was new to me. Samuel shared his plans for the exhibition, Emily the story of how they met. Beatrice, quieter than before but seemingly more stable, mentioned going to graduate school. Art history, she explained. What I studied before I got distracted by everything else. After dessert, Samuel raised his glass, and there was that warmth in his voice that is not born of politeness or formality, but of recognition and genuine admiration. To Grandma Eleanor, who taught us all that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. He looked at me with a kind smile, full of respect, and at the same moment Beatrice, sitting opposite him, added, as if picking up an unspoken thought, and that true value is not always visible on the surface. She met my gaze, in which for the first time in a long time there was neither reproach nor guilt, only a bright, sincere smile. Later, when the evening was drawing to an end and the guests were already beginning to arrive, she led me to a quiet corner of the living room, as if she was about to say something important, which required not just privacy but trust. "I have something for you," she said, and took a neat velvet box from her bag. I opened it and saw a pendant in an elegant silver frame, simple, elegant, and in the center, surrounded by a thin frame of metal, shone that very diamond. "I know you said I could keep it," she explained hastily. "But I thought you should wear it now, not save it for someone else's future." I picked up the pendant and held it up to the light, watching the diamond facets catch and reflect the autumnal gold of the lamp. It was beautiful, both in form and gesture. "I thought a lot about that day," she continued, her voice quieter, taking on the intonation that people use when they speak not out of a desire to explain but out of a desire to be understood. "About why I reacted the way I did. My therapist helped me understand that all my life I'd been chasing approval, through appearance, material signs of success, status. I'd never learned to distinguish between what was real and what was just packaging. We teach what we know," I said, and she nodded, as if she'd already said it. "Your parents taught you that appearances matter." "Yes. But I'm an adult now. I'm responsible for my own values now." She touched the pendant lightly. "I was devastated when you sold the beach house, but I realize now that it forced me to confront myself, and what I wanted, not what I thought I should want." "What do you really want?" I asked. She smiled, and it was the smile I remembered from her childhood, open, bright, without a hint of tension. "To create something meaningful. To immerse myself in what's truly important to me. To build relationships based on mutual respect, not on expediency. Those are worthy goals." "They're your goals," she said. I just hadn't noticed them before. When the guests left, Matteo stayed behind, surprisingly willing to help with the dishes despite my attempts to dissuade him. "Let me do something. Consider it symbolic restitution," he said with a grin. In the kitchen, away from everyone else, he suddenly became serious. "I met the new owners of the beach house last month." Just like that. "I don't know why. Maybe to close the gestalt." "And what did you feel?" "They changed everything. The colors, the furniture, the garden. It doesn't feel like our place anymore." "And did that upset you?" "Oddly enough, no. It made me realize that it wasn't home I missed, but what it stood for. Family. Resilience. Connection. Everything I almost destroyed in my pursuit of money." He rinsed the plate and handed it to me. "But I'm learning. Slowly, but I'm learning." When everyone had left, I was left alone with the silence, standing on the balcony of my apartment, high above the shimmering evening city, holding a cup of weak jasmine tea, looking out over the Charles River as the autumn night fell, not swiftly but softly, as if covering the world with a warm gray blanket. The new diamond pendant felt pleasantly cool at the base of my throat, a weight that reminded me not of its cost but of its significance, something that could not be measured in carats or dollars. The lights of the city reflected in the river, creating intricate patterns on the surface of the water, flashes, shimmers, as if reality itself had finally allowed itself to be both clear and complex at the same time. The beach house, once a place of summer happiness, family traditions, laughter to the sound of the surf, now existed only in my memory, taking up as much space in it as it had once occupied in life. The family I had once considered the only truth turned out to be something else, a fluid construct of people, expectations, attachments, and betrayals, irreparably altered. And in these changes, painful but liberating, relationships that had seemed solid were destroyed, reconsidered, and, in places, rebuilt, not as a replica of the past, but as something different, perhaps more fragile, but certainly more honest. In the reflection of the balcony door, I caught a glimpse of my own face, direct, clear-eyed, defiant. The woman who looked at me was no longer the helpful grandmother who knitted dolls with a secret gift inside, hoping to earn love. Nor was she the one who, overcome by pain, sold her house to prove something. This woman was new, one who, after living for almost 8 decades, finally understood that boundaries are not a manifestation of selfishness, but a form of respect, first and foremost for oneself. Love built on sacrifice becomes debt bondage. Respect that can be bought with property is not worth the price. True family is born not from blood relationship, but from a mutual choice to be together, despite everything. I touched the pendant, the stone in which, like me, had gone through a journey from misunderstanding to return. It was rejected without being understood, and then discovered, seen through the outer layer. This diamond, hidden in the heart of a knitted doll, became a symbol of my own journey, from invisibility to significance, from conformity to freedom. Perfect timing, Laura said when I told her about Beatrice's gift. This diamond is to be worn, not hidden for the sake of someone else's future. And she was right. The time when I was silent, when I hid my opinions, when I retreated for the sake of someone else's comfort, was over. I no longer needed to be comfortable, safe, acceptable. I needed to be myself. My balcony offered an amazing view, a river flowing slowly below, with light misty streaks swirling above it, and somewhere in the distance an old brownstone house, now filled with the voices of new residents creating their own stories in the space I had once poured my soul into. And beyond the horizon, where the mist met the waterline, there was a beach house, no longer ours, but living a different life, with different holidays, different people whose stories were just beginning. I didn't feel pain. I felt completion. And here, in this unexpected epilogue, amidst the soft silence of my new home, I was finally writing a story in which I was the main character. Not a secondary figure in someone else's narrative, not a resource, not a background, not a quiet, support element, but a full-fledged, independent woman with her own will, her own decisions, and the right to her own happiness. I returned to the apartment, and the light in the living room reflected in the pendant, playing with highlights on the walls. Not everything valuable was lost in the storms of the past. Some treasures were found again. Others, deeper, were discovered for the first time. This was not the ending I had once expected. This was better, more complex, brighter, more sincere. This was mine. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.